Hello, I'm Sarah Coates and you're watching I24 News. We begin here in Israel, where the leader of the newly formed Blue and White Party, former IDF chief Benny Gantz, says that he won't invite the Arab parties or right-wing parties into his coalition if his party wins the election on April 9. Now, this as Gantz is also telling Israel's Channel 12 that he's willing to hold any debate with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at any place.
The situation regarding Netanyahu has gotten worse, and there's only one thing that can save Netanyahu from this, and that is if the hearing will stop the indictment from being submitted. I doubt this will happen. In my estimation, the indictment will be submitted. Regrettably, this will happen. Therefore, I will not sit with Netanyahu.
And for more, let's bring in our diplomatic correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. Mike, thank you. So we saw Benny Gantz really making the rounds tonight on Israeli television. Tell us what else came out of this.
Gantz is trying to stem the bleeding right now. He's had a rough go of it the last couple of weeks as his poll numbers have been sinking. So this is an attempt to finally talk to some serious journalists and try to turn the tide of the election here. Number one, as you mentioned, he said he'll debate Netanyahu, and Netanyahu, I don't think, is going to take him up on that offer. He did say that Israel should aspire to peace. However, there's no one there on the other side right now to talk to. He refused to say whether there should be a Palestinian state. In terms of a coalition, which he's far away from building right now, he said he would sit with the far-left Meretz. He would sit with the new right party of Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked. He will not sit with the united right-wing parties, which includes the controversial Jewish Power Party. I also said that he won't sit with the Arab parties. He said the Arabs are equal citizens of Israel. There's no doubt about it, but the Arab leaders, the Arab party leaders, act against Israel's interests, and until that changes, he will not sit with those particular parties. He also mentioned, of course, the controversies now with Benjamin Netanyahu and his alleged media accusations saying that he profited from the sale of submarines under the table due to some shares that he held in a private company that he did not reveal. He had not been charged and is not a suspect in Case 3000, which involves the illegal or potentially corrupted sale of those submarines and boats. But Gantz is moving forward with these accusations. The Likud party has responded in kind, saying that Gantz should worry about his own scandal right now. Gantz enveloped in a scandal in which apparently the Iranians hacked his phone. He was notified a while ago by the Shin Bet Internal Security Agency about that hack. Gantz has said publicly that there is no security information on that phone that could be held against him by the Iranians or whoever holds that information. Really hasn't said, though, and it's conspicuous, he hasn't said whether there's any personal information on that phone that could potentially compromise him. And the Likud focused on that in their reaction to his media appearances tonight, saying that he could be held captive to the Iranians due to compromising information. He said not protecting his phone was bad judgment. Going with the Iranian nuclear accord was bad judgment. Attending the memorial event in 2014 for both Israelis and Palestinians killed in the Gaza conflict was bad judgment, basically saying that Gantz is not fit to lead the country.
Okay, well, not long to go now until the April 9 elections. Mike Wagenheim, thank you. Let's go now to Gaza, where the Israeli Defense Forces has fired at two groups of Palestinians launching incendiary balloons from the Gaza Strip into Israeli territory, with the IDF releasing a statement saying its aircraft shot at two separate groups launching balloons from the northern and southern parts of the Strip. Now, at this stage, it's unclear if there have been any casualties, but we will, of course, bring you more information on this story as it becomes available. Hungary has now opened a trade office in Jerusalem with diplomatic status. The decision was announced during Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's visit to Israel late last month. He said at the time that he hopes it'll be a good step forward in further improving the relationship between Hungary and Israel. Now, the decision stopped short of a Hungarian embassy move to Jerusalem, but the trade office opening has nonetheless been praised by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Here's more from our correspondent Ariel Levin-Waldman.
A big move for Israeli diplomacy. Hungary opened its first diplomatic mission in Jerusalem today, right here in the middle of Jerusalem at the city tower. Hungary's foreign minister came to help dedicate this and spoke alongside Israel's prime minister to dedicate this new development in relations between the two countries.
And I want to extend special thanks for two things that the government of Hungary is doing. One, the battle against the falsehoods and slanders leveled at Israel in international forums. You've been superb, and I want to congratulate and salute you for it. The second is your stance against anti-Semitism, which has been robust and important and consistent.
We reject to combine restrictive economic and commercial measures with political issues. We will not apply the decision of the European Commission on labeling.
Both nations have remarked that economic cooperation between them is a very big deal for both nations, totaling more than $500 million in trade every single year. Hungary, for its part, says that the climate for business in Israel is stupendous for their own businesses, citing very low corporate tax rates. For Israel, this means improved diplomatic support and possibly even votes at the United Nations. However, this could be a controversial issue for many people. While the Hungarian government did stop short of issuing any statement on the status of Jerusalem, Israel did endorse this move as a victory of sorts. Both Israel and the Palestinian territories claim it as the capital of their own states, something that most nations have refused to make a statement on. Hungary opening an official diplomatic mission here could be seen by many as officially endorsing the Israeli position. And what comes next, beyond simply the blooming of trade and relations, could be many diplomatic pressures. Ariel Evan Waldman, I-24 News.
Let's move now to Holland, and authorities there say they're seriously looking into a terrorist motive behind yesterday's tram shooting in Utrecht after a letter was found penned by the main suspect, 37-year-old Turkish-born Gökmen Tanis. Now, that attack has left 3 people dead and 7 others injured, with police saying so far they've found no link between Tanis and the victims, despite earlier reports saying otherwise. Police prosecutors releasing a statement saying so far a terrorist motive is seriously being taken into account. This is based on a letter found in the getaway car, among other things, and the nature of the facts. Tanis was arrested following a 7-hour manhunt. Now, as this wave of terror attacks rocks the world, the brother of the terrorist who murdered 3 children and an adult at a Jewish school and 3 others also in Toulouse in a number of other attacks back in March 2012 has spoken to our French language channel. Here's what he has to say.
This tragedy will haunt me until the day I die. I will always remember the 7 victims and the people injured. I want to remind the French people that the last time children were killed because they were Jewish was during the Nazi period, and this evil is back in France. Today in France, especially in the working class areas, Mohamed Merah is considered a hero. He opened the way for Jew hatred and made it a highway.
The president of Kazakhstan has just announced his shock resignation 29 years after being sworn into office. 78-year-old Nursultan Nazarbayev announcing he's stepping down in a special broadcast on state television, saying the mandate of the presidency will pass to the chairman of the Senate for the remainder of the presidential term, which expires in March next year. The move comes on the back of growing discontent in Kazakhstan, with the economy there still recovering from a huge plunge in oil prices back in 2014, along with the impact of Western sanctions on Russia, which is a vital trading partner of the country. And more than 1,000 people are feared dead in Mozambique after tropical cyclone Idai tore through the region over the weekend. So far, the official death toll stands at over 200 people, but time is running out for those who are trapped, with rescuers unable to reach victims, with strong winds and heavy rain hampering their extraction. Now, according to the United Nations, 1.7 million people were in the path of the storm in Mozambique, with a further 920,000 affected in Malawi. Emergency teams are now using boats to try and get people out of trees and off roofs, with the South African military also involved, as the impoverished country suffers perhaps the worst related natural disaster ever to hit the Southern Hemisphere. And we'll have more on this story when we come back. Stay with us.
I-24 News, the international channel in the heart of the Middle East, now brings you a new view of this troubled region. From I-24 News' acclaimed Arabic language channel, the stories, the people, the passions of the Middle East that you haven't seen before. A weekly roundup of highlights from I-24 News Arabic. Every Sunday, only on I-24 News.
David, what should we lead with tonight? Iran, China, Russia, D.C.?
How about North Korea?
Well, on Crossroads, we usually cover them all. I'm Tal Heinrich.
And I'm David Schuster. Join us each night for hard-hitting interviews, detailed analysis,
and the most important information you need to know.
We heard you loud and clear. You want more clear cut? You got it. Clear Cut Plus gives us an extra half an hour to give you more of the news that matters. We cut through the noise, we cut to the chase, and we cut out the BS. Join me, Michelle McCory, on Clear Cut and Clear Cut Plus for the clearer picture.
I'm Lauren Izzo on I-24 News. Join me on High Definition right here for an in-depth understanding of Israel's diverse society in groundbreaking documentaries.
What is this show about, by the way?
This show is called Man Bites Dog.
How does that relate to...
It's just a philosophy.
It doesn't.
We're making it up as we go along.
Great.
Thanks for staying with us. Brazilian leader Jair Bolsonaro is making his first visit to the White House, meeting with US President Donald Trump. Now, the two leaders are expected to discuss a number of issues on this trip, including how to increase US private sector investment in Brazil and resolve the political crisis in Venezuela. Both Bolsonaro and Trump are trying to oust Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, endorsing opposition leader Juan Guaido. And for more on this story, let's bring in our senior Washington correspondent, Dan Raviv, who is standing by outside the White House. Dan, thank you. Firstly, what were your main takeaways from these opening statements we heard a little while ago from Trump and Bolsonaro there?
Yes, after they had their private talks, there was a news conference, but the opening statements really told the story. At least politically, these two men are friends. They have finally met. A senior U.S. official told us that President Trump likes the fact that President Bolsonaro is referred to in South America as the Trump of the tropics. And it's quite clear that President Trump liked his visitor very much. For instance, the United States will unexpectedly endorse the bid by Brazil to join the Worldwide Economic Organization, the OECD. Also, Brazil is doing everything it can to play host to U.S. space launches. And President Trump said that could even have to do with what he calls Space Force, which is more military activities in space. This clearly is an alliance, and as President Bolsonaro said, for the first time in decades, Brazil has a president who is not anti-American. And the Trump White House enjoys that quite a bit, Sarah.
Okay, and Dan, we know that they're both trying to oust Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro. So tell us, just how are they planning on putting more pressure on him?
They did not hide that fact. They want Maduro to leave office. They plan to impose more pressure. So far, in public, President Trump thanked President Bolsonaro for permitting the U.S. to put a lot of aid on the border between Brazil and Venezuela. No hint there that maybe he would also allow U.S. troops. All President Trump would say on that subject is all options are open. And the Brazilian leader said that many things were discussed in private behind closed doors that cannot be discussed in public. There were hints about joint action, but no solid information was shared, Sarah.
And Dan, they both spoke rather quite strongly against socialism. So give us a little bit more about that there.
Well, absolutely, and that is part of the flavor of their get-together. When it comes to Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, that's the way it's being portrayed. Get rid of a socialist who is nothing, as Trump put it, but a puppet of Cuba. As a matter of fact, President Trump said that if Cuba and Nicaragua were to become free countries and there's a change in Venezuela, then there'll be no socialist governments in this hemisphere. People will be free. That's exactly where Bolsonaro is as well. So you have two men here who are committed to somehow changing the government in Venezuela, saying, of course, that socialism is a terrible system. And by the way, President Trump added, and here in the United States, we certainly don't want socialism. That's his little dig at his opponents in the Democratic Party, Sarah.
Okay, senior Washington correspondent Dan Raviv outside the White House, thank you so much for that update. Moving on, and Iran and Syria are demanding that the United States withdraw its troops from Syria, and the Damascus government is threatening US-backed Kurdish forces with military defeat if they do not agree to a return of state authority. Our senior Middle East correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasim has the latest.
Top military brass in Syria, Iran and Iraq met in Damascus on Monday, topping the agenda, foreign troop presence in Iraq and Syria. Both Tehran and Damascus demanded Washington withdraw its troops from Syria.
The meeting discussed the measures to be taken in order to regain territories that are out of government control, including areas where American forces are available.
The Syrian army has made sizable territorial gains in the 8-year-old civil war, with major help from Russia and Iran. The U.S. announced last December that it would pull its troops from Syria. Its ally, the Syrian Kurdish fighters, not happy with the decision. They are on the verge of defeating ISIS. Syria's defense minister had a strong message for them.
The only card remaining in the hands of the Americans and their allies is the SDF. And it will be dealt with through the two methods used by the Syrian state: national reconciliation or the liberation of the areas that they control through force.
The meeting took place just days after Iranian President Hassan Rouhani concluded his own visit to Baghdad, during which he signed serious bilateral trade agreements, hoping to overcome crippling U.S. sanctions. Iraqi officials want to see similar cooperation extended to neighboring Syria.
The coming days will witness the opening of the border crossing and the continuation of visits and trades between the two countries.
The meeting didn't include the Russians, a major supporter of President Bashar al-Assad, and both the U.S. and Israel are working at curbing Iran's growing influence in the region. But with no sign that Iranian forces are on their way out, this may risk new escalation. Hamad Al-Qasim, I-24 News.
Campaign finance has been a huge issue in the United States, but what about in Israel? And what about when campaign funding comes not from Israelis, but from sources outside Israel? Well, this issue grabbed headlines in Israel's elections 4 years ago, and it started to come back late in this year's election campaign. Senior international affairs correspondent Owen Alterman looks at what is allowed and what isn't for foreign donors and what it means in Israel's election campaign.
V15, one of the big controversies of Israel's elections 4 years ago. A group set up to channel support for center-left and left-wing parties, with billboards, with a get-out-the-vote drive, and with money from abroad, including indirectly from the Obama administration State Department, setting off angry reactions on the political right, from Israel all the way to Capitol Hill.
A fortune is flowing from overseas to the left-wing NGOs and to the V15 NGO with one purpose: to replace the ruling Likud under my leadership.
Fast forward to 2019, Israelis again going to the polling booths. Another high-stakes election in which foreign donors from the left or the right could put their fingers on the scale, and not just in the cyber world, but in on-the-ground organizing.
There is no limit under the law to propaganda that calls for the right or left or an agenda. But the minute you call for voting for a particular party or against a particular party, then this falls within the bounds of the law and is prohibited.
Israeli law does put limits on foreign funding of political parties, individual candidates in primaries, and, quote, active bodies in elections. But that still leaves a wide field of play.
If it focuses not on parties and candidates, but on political issues, against political corruption, in favor of promoting the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, and so on, this organization is not defined according to the law as an active body in elections.
Outside groups have popped up here and there in this year's campaign. The Without Unity, Your Vote is Lost campaign urged center-left parties to unite, as Benny Gantz's and Yair Lapid's parties eventually did. And in recent weeks, Darkenu, V15's successor group, has returned to the political playing field. And the question, will it have an impact?
Political parties in Israel in these elections, as in the previous elections, are much more active in elections. Even in the previous elections, everyone talked about V15. In practice, the Labour Party was much more active.
With 3 weeks to go before Israelis vote, foreign donors could still leave their mark. A lot of people with money in a lot of places have a lot of interest in Israel's elections. If they want to take out their wallets, Israeli law won't really stand in their way. Owen Alterman, I-24 News.
Meanwhile, a campaign from Israel's New Right Party is triggering a whole lot of criticism. Here's more from Ellie Hockenberg.
All publicity is good publicity. A new campaign ad of the hawkish New Right Party has sparked a storm.
Fascism.
In a new viral video, Israeli Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked is acting as a model for a perfume named Fascism.
To me, it smells like democracy.
But aside from the problematic content of the campaign presenting fascism as a hip thing in 2019, there's mounting criticism over its chauvinistic scent.
Ayelet Shaked and her defenders have lashed out in the past at people who dismiss her as not much more than a pretty face who don't take her seriously enough. But in making a commercial like this themselves, the campaign is sort of saying, yeah, we're going to take advantage of the fact that she's good-looking and glamorous as well as being a very aggressive justice minister.
First of all, fascism isn't funny, and I'll tell you what else isn't funny. As long as a woman is portrayed as a sexual object aimed at satisfying the desires of the hegemon, we are all in danger, especially women in such a key position. What is so funny here? What is the self-humor here? To show that I am both a justice minister and one that can seduce a man? I can't understand what's funny.
Shaked reacted to the backlash, saying on Israel's Army radio,
I have self-deprecating humor, and I do not like all the exaggerated political correctness discourse. 50% of the party is composed of strong and independent women. We do not have to exaggerate. We are in the middle of elections. We are celebrating the holiday of Purim, and people have to take themselves a little less seriously.
But many find it far less funny.
This video has an ironic twist. One of the problems is that if you don't have that tagline, it really does look like she's advertising fascism and thinks that fascism smells great. And so that's not a good look for a right-wing party that's criticized for undermining democracy.
Shaked isn't really a fascist. She's a robot voicing fascist messages. I don't think she even knows what that is. She has no clue how in the past a quarter of humanity was annihilated because of such ideas. I assume that if she knew what fascism was, she wouldn't have glorified it.
With elections around the corner and worried about passing the electoral threshold into parliament, the New Right Party is all about creating buzz. But it's unclear if this bold fragrance will sway voters or push them away. Ellie Hockenberg, I-24 News.
New Zealand and the world is in mourning days after one of the most horrific terror attacks in the Western world. More here from Bianca Zanini.
An emotional moment in Christchurch, New Zealand. Muslims returning to their mosques for the first time since a deadly terrorist attack shook the country on Friday. A lone gunman entered 2 mosques, killing 50 and wounding dozens. Australian Brenton Tarrant, a suspected white supremacist, was charged with murder on Saturday. Now the country is looking to heal. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern quick to promise changes in their gun laws.
This ultimately means that within 10 days of this horrific act of terrorism, we will have announced reforms which will, I believe, make our communities safer.
New Zealand has a strong hunting tradition. And although getting a license requires a background check and a firearms course, they're rarely refused. And gaps in the legislation means many weapons don't need to be registered. In 2015, the country had 1.24 gun-related homicides per 100,000 people. In the U.S., that number was around 11. With a relatively low number of gun-related deaths, there hasn't been much focus on changing the gun laws. Until now.
if we're to continue to ensure the safety of our Muslim communities and others, the 200 ethnicities that live in New Zealand, we have to be alive to the fact that there are those who do not share our values of openness, of diversity, of compassion. And that's something we're going to have to confront as a nation.
The suspected terrorist published an 87-page memoir touting extreme anti-immigrant views. U.S. President Donald Trump was asked to weigh in.
We see today white nationalism as a rising threat around the world.
I don't really. I think it's a small group of people that have very, very serious problems. I guess if you look at what happened in New Zealand, perhaps that's a case. I don't know.
Monday, thousands of students turning up at the mosques to pay tribute to the victims. Performing a traditional Maori haka, their message was clear. We stand with you. Bianca Zanini, I-24 News.
And that is all we have time for this edition. Thanks for watching.